Guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Precious Benjamin here. So in today's tutorial, we are going to be talking about Power Query in Microsoft Excel. We are going to be cleaning our data and performing some calculations in the Power Query editor. After this, we are going to be moving over to working with our pivot table. I will show you how you can actually create your pivot table, how you can manipulate your pivot table, and actually how you can visualize your pivot table in Microsoft Excel. Also, I'll be leaving a link to the drive where you can actually find the data set I'll be working with in case you want to build along. But before we hop in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like, and share. Thank you so much for watching. So this is the data set we are going to be working with on Excel. Okay, now this opens up my Excel. Okay, now I will go over to say new file. Now before we actually go over to our analysis, let's actually see what this can actually mean. Let's try to understand the interface of Excel. Now for this, when you click here, you see that here you can insert cells, you can insert sheet rows, you can insert sheet columns, and you can insert a sheet. Okay, so if I click on insert sheet here, as you can see, this actually inserts a new sheet. Okay, now if I don't want the sheet anymore, I can simply right click on the sheet and click delete. Okay, now this goes back to how it used to be. Now you can also use here to delete a cell, you can use here to delete sheet rows, you can use here to delete sheet columns, you can actually use here to delete sheet. Okay, now let me say I want to delete sheet columns. Let me say I want to go over here now and I say I want to delete sheet rows. Okay, so as you can see, one of the sheet rows was actually deleted. The same way for sheet columns. Now we actually have what we call format, where we can actually format row height, we can format our cells, we can format the row height, we can format our column width, we can format hide or unhide rows, okay, or hide columns and the rest of them. Now, when you go to this is actually where some formulas you can actually use for your mathematical manipulations and all of them. Then when we go over to fill, you can decide to fill the column up, or you can decide to fill the column down, or you can decide to fill the column by the side. So this is actually what this does. Now you can find and select when you actually have a lot of data and you don't want to go through this hurdle of coding and all. You can simply find using this right here. Now, insert, this is actually where, in case you want to add a new shape, you want to add a new table, you want to add a new picture, you want to add icons or 3D models. Now, when it comes to adding anything, your visuals, your anything, this is where you come to the insert page. Now, draw, normally you don't actually need to use this for your analysis. This is actually when you want to draw anything at all. This is not actually won't be necessary for your analysis, especially for this analysis. Now, page layout, mostly this is not also going to be necessary for your analysis. So formulas, now this is where you have a lot of your essential formulas, like you have your lookup and your reference, you have your math, you have your dates, you have your text, logical, financials, and everything. Now, when you come to your financials, you see a lot of formulas you can actually work with. Now, when you come to your auto sum, so you see a lot of formulas, mathematical formulas you can actually work with. Okay, so mostly for analysis, this is actually where you have to pay more attention. Now you see your data. Then we are going to be working with this soon, so I will not actually go ahead to start explaining it. Now review. Now this is mostly not necessary. Okay, now let's go ahead. Now, remember we said that we are going to be working with our Power Query editor to actually make sure that our data is actually clean and error-free before we go ahead to start working with our pivot tables and performing our visual analysis. Now, to do that, you have to come over to data. So once you come over to data, in case you do not actually have pivot table in your own version of Excel, I'm going to be leaving a link to the description where you can download an add-on that you can add to your version of Excel in case you do not have Power Query in your version of Excel. Now let's go back to home. Now to access your Power Query, what you have to do is you come over to data. Now, once you come over to data, you see from here, you see various sources where you can actually get data from. Now, you can get data from maybe from table, from web, from text, CSV, from existing connections, and the rest of them. But for this particular tutorial, we are going to be clicking on this get data right here. Now, once you click on this get data, you see a lot of drop downs where you can get data from your database. In case you're working with SQL, you can get data from your SQL database, you can get data from your Oracle database, IBM database, MySQL database, PostgreSQL database, and the rest of them. So there are lots of databases on Excel where you can actually connect your data or get your data from your database. Now, another place you can get data from in Excel is Azure. Now, you can get your data from Azure SQL database and the rest of them. Now, you can also get your data from online services. You can get your data from SharePoint. You can get your data from Microsoft Exchange Online. You can get it from Salesforce. You can get it from Salesforce Reports. Now, you can also get data from other sources where you see from web. Maybe you want to get data from Google Analytics, so you can get data from web. You can get data from a lot of places, Hadoop. So there are a lot of places you can get data. You can decide to combine queries, you can decide to merge queries, you can decide to append queries. Now, in case you're confused on what merging and appending is, I think I already have a video explaining that. Now, for the sake of this tutorial, we are going to be getting our data from file. Now, why are we getting our data from file? Because we already have our data saved to our computer. So we are not getting it from a database, we are not getting it from Azure, but we are getting it from our computer. Now, once you hover on from database, you see that there are several options of the type of data you want to get. Now, you can import your data as an Excel file, you can import your data as a CSV file, you can import your data as an XML, a JSON file, a PDF file, or from a folder. Now, you actually use from a folder when you actually have created a folder with different types of data. Mostly you use a folder when you're working with more than one data set, when you have to combine two or more data sets together for your analysis. But in this situation, we are working with just a single data set. We are working with just a single data set, a single table. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to be going from our cell workbook. So we are going to be clicking here. So the data we are going to be working with is red box. So all we have to do is click on this red box and we click on import. Now this imports this now this imports this here. Okay. Now once you click on import, you actually come over to this particular interface. Now when you look at here, you see that we have our sheet one. Okay. Under this red box stores Excel file. Now this is actually a preview of our data set. Now from here you can see a preview of our data set. Here you can see the columns we have, where we have the customer ID, customer name, product ID, units, quantity, unit price, cost price, sales date, state, and the rest of them. Now, you can decide to go over here and load this into your Excel worksheet to start making your analysis. So, or you can decide to go to the load to option where you will actually see other places where you can load your data to. But because we are trying to perform a thorough data cleaning on this data set, we are not going to do that. So we are going to be transforming our data. Now, when we click on this transform data takes us to our Power Query editor in Excel. Now, let's click that. Now, once you click on transform data, as you can see, this is our Power Query editor, right? Now, this is our Power Query editor in Excel. So we can simply come over here, double click on this sheet one and rename it to red box analysis. Okay. Now this rename starts to red box analysis. Okay. Now the next thing we can simply do is let's try to understand this Power Query interface in Excel. Now when you look at this data, this actually shows us our data thoroughly. From here now we can actually see our data thoroughly. Now let's go ahead and understand the functionalities of our Power Query editor. Now, when you actually look up here, you will see choose columns. Now, when you click the drop down, you see choose columns and go to columns. Now, in case you want to actually go to a particular column, now this is actually where you choose. Okay, so once you click on product ID, and you say okay, it takes you to that particular column. Okay, now you can easily come here and say you want to choose columns. Now in case you want to view a specific columns or specific columns, you can actually navigate it from here, but we don't want to do that, so we go ahead and say cancel. Now you can actually use this to remove columns. Okay, you can remove columns, remove other columns. Right now, as I'm clicking on the product ID column, let's say I want to remove this column. All I have to do is I click on remove column. Okay, so as you can see, it shows over here that I've successfully removed the product ID column. Now, one thing is that whatever we have done here, we can always undo here. So because we don't actually want to remove the product ID column, what we have to do is we go over here and undo this. Now you see that our product ID column comes back. Now, for here, this is where you decide on which role you want to keep. Now you can decide to keep top rows, you can decide to keep bottom rows, or you can decide to keep duplicated rows. Okay. Now split column. For this split column, I'm not going to be explaining it. You're going to be seeing how it actually works firsthand. Now, when you look at this, you can actually use first column or first row as header. Now, let me say, for instance, our data type doesn't have a header. Okay, there is no header columns like all this. There is no header column. Now our columns doesn't have a header. Okay, we can simply decide to use our first row as header. Okay, now for here we are going to be seeing how this actually works firsthand. Now for here we are not going to be making use of this. Okay, but in my next tutorial I'm going to be making use of this, so you see how we can merge and append queries. Okay, now let's just go ahead to start working on this. Now, I want you to look at this data set thoroughly. You will see that there are a lot of data cleaning we actually have to do, but we have to start and take them one after the other. Now, the first thing I want us to do is I want us to investigate each column one after the other. Now, to do that, you have to just double click on this. Now, once you double click on this, you see all the rows in this column. Okay. Now, when you click down, you see that we actually have SS here. Okay, so we are going to cancel that. Now, let me explain this data set. This data set is actually a data set for a communication company based in the United States. It's a startup company. Now, this company deals on three types of phones. Okay, so they only sell Samsung, iPhone, and Redmi phones, and they only sell these three brands. They do not sell any other thing. Okay, so one thing with this company is that once every year they have a hunt game show. Now, what is this hunt game show all about? They actually hide a particular product in their website, and they ask their customers to go on the website and search for this particular product. Now, any customer that is able to find this particular product where it is hidden in their website, this customer takes this particular product for free. Now in the company, it is a standard that anytime a customer gets a free item, okay, during their hunt game show, they record it as SX, where they will have no product ID and they will have no customer ID. Now, because of we do not want to make use of that particular information for our analysis, we are just going to go over and uncheck this and say, okay, now let's move ahead. Now let's go over to our customer name column. Now, when you look at the customer name column, one thing you need to know is that, or one thing you will notice is that the customer name is joined with the product name, and that is not supposed to be so. Now, how are we going to fix this? To fix this, we are going to click on that customer name column. Then we are going to go to split column. Then we are going to say by delimiter. Then we are going to leave it at custom and we say by dash, which is correct. Then we say leftmost delimiter, okay, and we say none, okay, then we say okay. Now, as you can see, this actually splits our customer name and our product name by the delimiter dash. Okay. Now, as you can see, we actually have our customer name and our custom and our product name on two different columns. Okay. So what we have to do is we simply have to double click on this and name this product's name. Now, the next thing is when you actually look at this customer name, you see that it is showing customer name one. So what we have to do is we have to go ahead and turn that to customer name. Now let's go ahead and analyze the customer name table. Now when you click on the customer name table, you see that we have this particular customer name with a question mark, and it is not supposed to be so. Now there is no way a customer name will have a question mark. Okay, so what do? We go ahead and cancel this. Then we go ahead and click on replace value. Then we go ahead and say replace Felix question mark with Felix. Then we say okay. Then we can go ahead and look at this again. As you can see, Felix question mark has been replaced with Felix. Now that means we have successfully removed the question mark from the customer name. Then we can go ahead and say cancel. Now the next thing we want to look at is our product name. Now let's click on our product name. Now, when you look at our product name, you will find out that we have a lot of mistakes in the spelling and the arrangement of our product name. While some items are recorded as iPhone with all small letters, some are recorded with all capital letters, and some are recorded with the first letter being a small letter and then the phone. Okay, which is the right way it should be spelled. The same thing we have Redmi and we have this year and we have Samsung, we have Samsung, then we have Samsung, and we have Samsung. Okay. Now, what we are going to be doing is that we are going to be replacing these values one after the other. Now, firstly, we want to replace iPhone with iPhone and replace iPhone with iPhone. Now, to do that, we go ahead and cancel. Then we also go over to our replace values. Okay. Then we say replace iPhone with iPhone. Then we say okay. Okay. Now the next thing we have to do, of course, let's go over and look at this. Then we say replace this iPhone with iPhone. So we go over to this and we say replace values. Then we say iPhone. Okay. You replace it with iPhone. Then we say okay. Then let's go over and look at what we did. So as you can see, we have one single name now for our iPhone. Okay. So all those other non-formatted names and spellings has been successfully replaced or eliminated. Now let's do the same for Redmi. Okay. Now what we have to do is we go over to our replace values. Okay. Then we say replace Redmi with Redmi. Then we say okay. Now, another thing we have to do is we have to replace Samsung with Samsung. Then we go to replace value and we say replace Samsung with Samsung. Then we say okay. Then the next thing we have to do, let's go over and look at this again. Then we have to replace Samsung with all small letters with how it should actually be. Okay, so we go over to cancel, then we go over to replace values, then we go over to say Samsung, then we say replace it with Samsung. Okay, then we say okay. So we have successfully replaced that. Okay, now, the next thing we have to do is let's go over to our product ID. Now, when you go over to our product ID, we see that our product ID looks okay. Okay, it looks okay, right? Then we can go ahead and say cancel because that is looking quite okay. Now, the next thing we have to do is let's go over to our quantity. Now, when you go over to our quantity, you see that we have one, we have two, okay? Now, which is not supposed to be so because our quantity should be all numerical characters and not categorical characters. Now, what do we have to do? We go over to cancel this, then we go over to replace value, and we say replace two with two, and we say okay. Then we also say replace two with two, and we say okay. Then we can also say replace one with one. Then we can say okay. Then we can go ahead and view that again. Now for quantity, we can see that we have successfully replaced all our categorical rows with numerical characters, right? Now, when you look at this, you see that we actually have a missing value in one of our rule. Okay, so we have two ways of handling this. We can go ahead and handle this by replacing our null with zero or NA. But for this particular analysis, I'm just going to remove our null value by unchecking it, and I say okay. Now we can move ahead. Now let's go over to unit price. Now when you see our unit price, as you can see, this is the various unit price we have, okay, and this is looking okay. Then we can go ahead and cancel this. Now let's go over to our cost price. Now for our cost price, you see we are having $800. You see, we are having USD 12,200, which is not supposed to be so. So we are going to be making use of the replace values. Now, to do that, we go over to say replace values and we say USD 1,200 and we say replace with 1,200 and we say okay. Now we also go over to check and see what else we need to do. Now we have to replace $800 with 800. Now to do that, we go over to our replace values and say $800 and we want to replace it with 800. Then we say okay, right? Now let's move ahead. Now the next thing we have to look at is our sales dates. Okay, as you can see, this is one thing you need to understand is that each country have their date from now. Now, from what we can see here, this is actually a state based in the United States called Georgia. Now, as you can see that this state is actually in the as you can see that this date is actually in the appropriate format for the United States of America. So we don't really need to change this. We can just go over and cancel. Now let's go over and look at our states and see if there's anything we have to do. And this shows Georgia. Then we can say okay. Now, the next thing we have to look at is our data type. Now, when you look at this right here, this tells us the type of data type our column is on, okay, or is. Now, this tells us the type of data type our column is. Now, whenever you see ABC123, it simply means that that column data type is set to any. That means there is no specific data type assigned to that particular column, okay? Now, what we have to do to assign a data type to our customer ID column is simply to click here and we say whole number. Now, this assigns whole number 123 to our customer ID column. Okay. Now, when you look at here, this is telling us that our data type for our customer name is text. Okay, which is actually correct because our customer name column is a text. Now, the same thing goes for our product name. Then for our product ID, no data type has been assigned. Now, to assign a data type, we just have to click on this, then we say whole number. Now, let's continue. Now, for our quantity, no data type has been assigned. So we also have to click on this and we assign whole number. So when you look at our unit price, you will see that our unit price is given as a whole number. But actually, I will want us to change this to currency. Okay, because that should be the appropriate data type here. Now, for this also, we are going to be changing it to currency, which is our cost price. Now, for our day sales date, we are going to be leaving it as date, which is actually correct already. Now, for our state is text, which is also correct. So we are going to be leaving it that way. Now, before we actually move ahead, there are some calculations I want us to actually do. Now, the first calculations I want us to do is I want us to add a column that actually shows our total sales. I want us to add a column that actually shows our total sales. And to actually calculate our total sales, we work with our quantity and our unit price. Now, to calculate our total sales, what we have to do is we say our quantity times our unit price. So, to do that, what we have to do is we click on our quantity and we click on our unit price. Then we go over to add column because we are trying to add a column that shows our total sales. We go over to add column. Now, when you click on add column, over here you have see your standard. Okay. Now we say multiply quantity by unit price. Then we click on multiply. Now, in case you actually want to double check if that is actually correct, okay, what we have to do is we can go over to pick up our calculator. Okay, we can pick up our calculator and we open up our calculator. We can simply go over and say quantity times unit price for our very first row. So that would be 2000 times 1200, and that will be giving us 24. Okay, now let's go over there and confirm it. This gives us 24, which is correct. Now we can simply go ahead and rename this to say total sales. Okay, so we have successfully renamed it to say total sales. Now let's say I do not actually like where this particular column is. I can simply click on this column and move it over to here. Okay. Now this shows our units, our quantity, our unit price, and our total sales. Now we can move ahead. The next thing I want us to actually calculate is I want us to calculate our total costs. Okay. I want us to calculate our total cost. And to calculate our total cost, we make use of quantity times cost price. So we can click our quantity and click our cost price. We are already on the add column. So what we have to do is just go over to our standard. Then we go over to we go over to multiply. Now this gives us our total cost. So we can come over here and say total cost. Okay. Now we can also decide to move this total cost just before after our total sales. Now this says total sales and total costs. Okay. Now the next thing I would want us to actually look at is let's create a column that shows our profits. Okay. Let's create a column that shows our profits. Now to do that, what we have to do is our profit would be our total sales minus our total costs, right? Now what we have to do is click on our total sales and click on our total costs. Then let's go over to standard and let's say subtract. Okay, now this subtracts our total sales from our total cost to give us our profit. So we can simply go over here and rename this to say profit. Then we can simply move this over here. Okay, so it shows our total sales, total cost, and profit. Now to double check this, we can actually go over to our calculator. Okay, then we can simply say 24 minus 16. That gives us definitely 800. Okay, so this shows that our calculations were actually correct. So we have successfully done our data cleaning and the necessary calculations I want us to do. So what we have to do is we simply have to go over to home, then we say close and load. Now this loads our data into our Excel worksheet. So as you can see that we can simply go over here to change the field of our table. Okay, we can simply go over here to change the field of our table. We can leave it this way, 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 or we can actually change it to whatever we want to change it to, but I'm just going to leave it as this. So now, as you can see that our data set has successfully been cleaned and actually arranged into a beautiful looking and well organized sheet in our Excel workbook. Now, the next thing we have to do is create our pivot table and go ahead to create our visualization. Like I mentioned, this is actually going to be a very simple visual. Create our visualization, like create a very simple dashboard. Now, to create our pivot table, the first thing we have to do is I will click on anywhere within my data set or my sheet. Then I will click on insert. Then I will click on pivot table. Then I'm going to be leaving all settings the way they are, and I'll simply say OK. Now this goes ahead to create our pivot table. Now creating a pivot table makes our analysis very easy and very smooth. Now let's say we have successfully created our pivot table. When you actually look here, we actually see all the columns in our data set. Now when you look here, you see filters in case you want to add filter to your visual. You see the column, you see the rows and you see the values. Now let's say we want to actually see our total sales by customer. Okay. Now what we have to do is we can simply click on our total sales and drag it to our values. Now let's say, ouch, we actually drag the wrong column to our values. We can simply click on this and say remove field. But of course, we want to work with our total sales. So we go back to our total sales and drag it back to our values. Then we go to our customer name and drag it to our rows. So we can go over here and say, we can go over here and call this customer name. Okay. Then, as you can see, we have different customer with different total sales. So, as you can see, Bambi has a total of 3,600 total sales. Basma has a total of 700. Dave has a total of 2,400, and the rest of them. Now, let's say we want to visualize this particular information in a visual. So, what we have to do is we simply go over to click in the column. Okay, then when you look up here, you see pivot analyze. You click on pivot table analyze. Then you go over to pivot charts. Then you see the different types of charts we actually have. Okay. As you can see, we can simply decide to visualize it on this type of chart, this type of chart, this type of chart, this type of chart. So whatever chart we want to visualize it with, we can actually decide to visualize it. Okay. So let's go over to column. So let's see this. This is 100% stacked column. So this is 3D. Okay, so this is 3D stacked column. So this is 3D 100% stacked column. Okay, so this is clustered column, right? So let's say we want to make use of the 3D column, okay? Or we simply want to make use of the clustered column. So you can actually click out to actually see it in a larger way. So we can simply go ahead and say, okay, now this inserts this particular visual here. All right. So you can simply go ahead to start formatting this visual to make it look bigger, to make it look smaller, remove background, whatever you want to do. Now, let's say I want to do a simple formatting on this particular visual. Okay. What I can do is I can simply go over to add. Okay. So let me say I want to remove as this. Now this removes it as this. I want to leave as this. Now let's say I want to remove chart title. Okay, I can simply remove chart title or add it. Now let's say I want to remove legend. Okay, I can simply remove legend. Okay, or add it. But let me say I want to remove or add legend or remove it. But let me say I want to remove legend because it's not actually doing anything there. So we can simply add a trend line to actually see the flow of our to actually see how our data flow. Okay, then we can simply go over to this. Okay, style. We can style it whichever way we want it to be styled. Okay, we can style it whichever way. So that various ways we can actually style it. So we can style it whichever way we want to style it. Okay, but let's go up and let's go over to color. So we can decide to change the color of our visual. Let's just say we want to leave it as this color. Okay, so we can also decide to leave it this way. Then let's go over to this and let's say we want to turn off data label. Okay, so we can also go ahead to rename this. Now let's call it total sales by customer. Let's say we want to call this total sales by customer. Okay, so we can actually go ahead to change the font of this, or we can also make it smaller. So let's say we want to leave it at 12. Okay, so we can also go over here. When you click over here, you see the different customers that we have. Okay, so we can decide to unselect all customers, and let's say we want to select one customer, or we want to select all customer to search. Okay, so this is where we actually make use of the search. Okay, so as you can see, we have successfully visualized our total sales by customer. Okay, now let's say we also want to visualize something else. We have to go back to our sheet and let's say create a pivot table. Or if we don't want to do that, we can simply go over to here and let's rename this and say pivot one. Okay, we can say pivot one. Then we can go over here and let's duplicate this. So let's copy this, okay, and let's say create a copy and say okay. Now this creates a copy of pivot one, so we can simply call this pivot two. Okay, so we can simply say pivot two. And in pivot 2, we can go ahead and delete this because we already have it in our pivot 1. So we can go ahead and delete this. Okay. Now for this, we can simply go over to our pivot table. Then we can unselect this two. Okay. Now let's say we also want to show our total cost by products. Okay, now let's say we want to show our total cost by product, so we want to see the products that actually costs more, okay, to actually acquire. So we can simply drag our total cost to values, okay, and we drag our product name, okay, to rows. So now as you can see, we are actually having two Samsung in our product name, which is not supposed to be so. Now, this can be caused by several reasons, but one of the reasons could actually be because of white spaces. Okay, because as you can see that the names are actually the same, so it can actually be because of white spaces. Now, to handle that, we have to go to our sheet, then we click on edit, then this takes us to our Power Query. Okay, so once we get to our Power Query, we can go over to our product name. Then let's go over to transform. So once we click on transform, we go over to format. Okay. Now let's trim this. Okay. Now this removes white spaces. Okay. So let's go over to this. As you can see now, we have just one Samsung that is visible. Then we can go over to say okay. Then we can go over to home and let's say close and apply. So as you can see, this has not reflected yet. So what we have to do is we have to click on our table, then we go over to pivot analyze, then we go over to say refresh. Now once we refresh, this actually automatically changes everything. Okay. Now, as you can see that our Samsung has the highest total cost. Okay. Our Samsung has the highest total cost. Okay. Now, let's say we also want to visualize this. So what we have to do is also click on the table, go over to pivot analyze, then we go over to pivot chart. Now, let's say we want to use a pie chart, okay, to show this. Now let's say okay, okay. Now this shows our data in a pie chart, okay. So we can go ahead to click here, then we can say show data label, okay. Then we can also format our data label to be center, to be inside, to be outside, to be best fit, to be data call out, or we can also go to more. Okay, but for this I want it to show, let's say, data colors. Okay, so we can leave it at this for now, so we can go ahead and minimize this. Okay, or we can go ahead and say Control Z and we can move this right here. Okay, let me just say I just want to remove the background of my pie chart, so I can simply click on my pie chart and I can right click and say format area, then over here I can say no fill. Now this removes the background of my pie chart. So I can go ahead and move it over here. Now to create another visual, I can simply go over to my pivot tool and I can right click, then I can say yes, copy pivot tool. I can say create a copy and I can say okay. Now this creates a copy of pivot tool. Then I can call this pivot tray. Okay, I can call this pivot tray. Then I can go over to delete this. Okay, I can go over to delete this, right? Then now I can go over to this. Okay, I can go over to this and I can remove this. Then I can simply go over to uncheck this, right? Now, let me say I want to see the customer with the highest profit. So I can go over to say profit to my values, and I can go over to say, let me say the products with the highest profit. So I can drag my products over here to my rows. Now, as you can see that Samsung actually gave us the highest profits. Okay. Samsung gave us the highest profits. Now, let me say I want to visualize this. I can go over to my pivot analyze. I can go over to my pivot charts. Then I can actually analyze this using my, let me say I want to make use of my bar charts. So I can click on my bar chart and I can say, okay, right? Then I can simply go over to click on this and I can say format area and I can say no fill. I can say okay. Now let me say I want to change the color of this, or I want to change the color. So I can go over to changes to this and leave it at that. Then I can move it here. So now we have a total of three pivot tables, right? We have a total of three pivot tables. Now let's say we just want to create one more visual, okay? So we can go over to our pivot tree, then we can right click and say move or copy. Then we can say make a copy. Then we can say okay. Then we can say we can call this pivot 4, right? Then we can go ahead and delete this. Then we can click on this. Okay. Then we can remove this. Then we can uncheck this. Now let's say I want to see the customer with the highest profit. So I can go ahead and say profit. Then I can go ahead and say customer that gave us the highest profit. Then as you can see, that will be, we have Bambi. Then I think the customer with the highest profit that gave us the highest profit should be Tini. So let's say we want the highest value to show first. What you have to do is click here, right click and say sort largest to smallest. Okay, so once we click on this, as you can see, this actually shows us the customer that gave us the highest profit. Now let's say we want to visualize this also. We can click on it, go over to pivot analyze, then go over to pivot chart. Then here we can actually use our bar charts. Okay, let's say we want to use our bar charts here. Okay, but let's just make use of our column bar chart. Let's make use of our column bar chart and let's make use of our column bar chart. So let's just use this and let's say okay. Then we can also right click and let's say format, okay. Then let's no fill and that is it. Then we can simply go over to color and let's change color to this. So we can simply say okay. Now we can simply call this total profits by customer. Now let's go over to start visualizing all the visuals we have created. Then we can go over to sheet 1. Okay. Then let's go over to view. So once we go over to view, let's uncheck grid lines. Now this gives us a clean dashboard. Okay, this gives us a clean slate to actually build our dashboards. So we can go over to pivot 1. Let's simply click on this and copy it. Okay, we can copy this, then go over to our sheet 1 and paste this. Okay, so we can simply go over to format and let's simply remove our colors. Okay, so we can simply move this over to here. Okay, so this is no fill. We can move this over to here. Then we can decide to make this smaller. Okay, we can decide to make this smaller. Okay, so we can simply go over to our pivot 2. So let's copy and let's come over to our sheet 1 and let's paste. Now let's say we want to visualize our pivot 3. So we simply come here, copy this, go over to our sheet and let's paste this here. Okay, so let's paste this here so we can move down. Okay.
Okay, now we can move this here, right? We can move this here, okay? Or we can simply make our visual smaller. We can make this smaller. So we can make it this way, okay? So we can make it this way. Then we can also move this here, and we can also make it smaller, okay? And make it a bit smaller, okay? Then for this, we can also move it here, okay? Let's say we want to move this here, right? Let's say we want to move this here. So we can simply drag this to be a bit bigger, okay? So now we can also go over to our pivot 4. Then we can simply go over and copy this, and let's go over to our sheet. Then let's paste this, okay? So we can simply paste this here, right, to show this. Okay, we can simply paste this here to show this. So this is not a professional dashboard, but this is just showing the major things we calculated. Okay.